Wait a second. Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow, your entire closet is gone. No hoodies, no fuzzy socks, not even that sad old hoodie you've had since college, and the entire planet is basically one giant freezer. How the hell did ancient humans, who didn't even have a single thread of real clothing, survive the Ice Age without turning into human popsicles? Most textbooks will tell you, they just wrapped themselves in animal furs, right? That's the story we all got taught in 5th grade social studies, like it was some obvious no-brainer. But what if I told you that entire story is basically a lie, or at least 70% of it is a massive oversimplification that misses all the wild, weird, and totally counterintuitive hacks our ancestors pulled off, that modern scientists are only just now figuring out? This isn't some boring prehistory lecture. We're breaking down the coldest, most underrated survival flex in the entire history of our species. And by the end of this video, you're gonna look at that old puffer jacket in your closet and go, wait, I've been doing this all wrong, this whole time. Let's start with the biggest myth everyone's been repeating for decades, that they just wore animal fur myth. For the longest time, every documentary, every kid's book, every random guy on Reddit arguing about prehistoric life will hit you with the same take. Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens killed a deer, skinned it, wrapped it around their shoulders. Boom, done. They survived 100,000 years of glaciers. But hold up a second. Let's actually do the math here, because this makes zero sense if you stop to think about it for 2 seconds. First off, before humans invented proper sewing needles, which we now know didn't show up until like 40,000 to 50,000 years ago, you can't just wrap a random animal hide around your body and expect it to keep you warm in 20-degree weather. That thing is gonna slip, it's gonna gap at the arms. It's gonna fall off the second you try to run after a mammoth, or even just chase down a rabbit for dinner. And even if you pin it on with a sharp rock, all the wind is gonna blow right through the gaps, and you're still gonna freeze your ass off in 10 minutes. Not to mention, tanning a hide properly so it doesn't rot, doesn't get stiff as a cardboard box, and doesn't smell so bad every predator within 5 miles can smell you coming from a mile away. That's not a trivial skill. Early humans, who were living 200,000 years ago, way before sewing, way before advanced tanning techniques, they didn't have that. So how the hell were they walking around in Ice Age Europe, where the average winter temperature was 10 to 20 degrees below zero modern levels, without freezing to death? Scientists used to just sweep this question under the rug, like, oh, they just evolved thicker skin, or more body hair or something. But no. We know for a fact that by the time Homo erectus showed up 2 million years ago, we had already lost almost all of our body hair. We're basically giant, mostly naked apes, with weirdly big brains and zero natural insulation. That's not a superpower, that's a design flaw. Every other large mammal living in the Ice Age had a full thick fur coat, layers of blubber, bodies shaped to retain heat. Mammoths had that thick underfur, woolly rhinos had inches of fat under their skin. Even the reindeer back then were built like walking insulated blankets. We're basically just walking bags of water that start shivering the second the temperature drops below 60 degrees. If you took a random modern human, stripped them naked, dropped them in the middle of an Ice Age winter, they'd be dead in under an hour, no questions asked. So how did our ancestors do it? For hundreds of thousands of years, before sewing, before proper tailored clothing, before even controlled fire was a 100% guaranteed thing, they could keep going 24/7? That's the part no one tells you. The first big secret isn't something they put on their bodies, it's something they did with their bodies. And it's so wild that even 10 years ago, most anthropologists would have laughed at you if you suggested it. Our ancestors didn't just tough out the cold, they evolved a super specific metabolic hack that modern humans have completely forgotten how to use. And it's called non-shivering thermogenesis. Wait, that sounds like a fancy science word, but let me break it down in normal people terms. You know how when you get really cold, you start shivering? That's your body trying to generate heat by shaking your muscles really fast. But that burns a ton of calories, like you can burn 500 extra calories an hour just shivering. And if you don't have a steady supply of food, you're gonna run out of energy super fast and crash. But our Ice Age ancestors had way more brown fat cells than we do today. The brown fat is this magical tissue that doesn't store calories like regular white fat. It just directly burns calories to make heat. No shivering required. It's like having a little internal space heater built right into your chest, your neck, your shoulders. Modern humans, we barely have any brown fat left. Most adults only have tiny little traces of it around our collarbones, and it's barely active. But recent studies on Neanderthal bones, and even on early Homo sapiens fossils from a 120,000 years ago, show that their bone chemistry proves they had metabolisms tuned to run 30 to 40% hotter than the average modern human today. That's not a small difference. That's like walking around with your internal thermostat cranked all the way up, 24/7. You could be standing in 30-degree weather, butt naked, and you'd be as comfortable as you are in a 70-degree room right now. Wait. But that can't be the whole story, right? Because if that was all it took, we wouldn't have invented clothes at all. And, you're right, that's just the first layer of the hack. The second trick they pulled off is something that every survival TikTok guy will tell you about today, but no one thought ancient humans were smart enough to do it 200,000 years ago. They mastered layered microclimate shelter building way earlier than we ever gave them credit for. We used to think that the first proper huts, the first semi-permanent shelters, showed up like 30,000 years ago. But in 2021, archaeologists digging in a cave in southern France found something that completely blew that timeline out of the water. They found post holes, arranged in perfect circles, lined with mammoth bone foundations, covered in packed mud and grass, that dated back 170,000 years. 170,000 years. That's way before modern humans even showed up in Europe. That was Neanderthals building actual insulated houses, not just hiding in random caves, not just hiding in random... These weren't just little stick huts, either. The largest one they found was almost 30 feet across, big enough for 20 to 30 people to live in at the same time. And the walls? They were lined with thick layers of moss, grass, and even animal dung, packed tight between the mammoth bone frames, which is a natural insulator that works better than fiberglass insulation in some conditions. The roof was covered in overlapping hides, not sewn, but layered so well that wind and snow couldn't get through. And in the center, they had a central fire pit that was designed to draw smoke up and out a small hole in the roof so the heat stayed trapped inside. Do you know what the temperature inside one of these huts was? Even when it was 10 degrees outside. Archaeologists did a full-scale reconstruction a couple years back, and they found that even with a tiny low-burning fire, the inside stayed a steady 65 to 70 degrees, 24 hours a day. That's warmer than a lot of people keep their apartments in the winter today. Wait a second. But caves, right? Everyone says, oh, they just lived in caves. But caves are terrible places to survive an ice age, if you think about it. Most caves are damp, they're full of bears and hyenas that want to eat you, and the temperature inside a cave in the winter is only like 32 to 40 degrees, max. That's not warm. But these man-made mammoth bone huts, they were custom-built heat traps. And the craziest part, they didn't just build them out in the open plains where there were no caves. They built them right outside cave entrances to block the wind from getting into the cave mouth, so even the cave itself became 20 degrees warmer than it was naturally. That's not primitive caveman behavior. That's engineering. That's the kind of stuff people thought only modern humans were smart enough to pull off 100,000 years later. But here's the next big question. If they had these super hot metabolisms and these perfectly insulated huts, why did they even need clothes at all? And that's where the third, most mind-blowing secret comes in, the one that breaks every single thing you thought you knew about early clothing. The first thing humans ever wore wasn't for warmth. It was for work. Think about it. If you're out hunting a mammoth, you're crawling through snow, you're dragging a 2,000-pound animal back to your camp, you're scraping hides for hours on end, you're climbing over sharp rocks and ice. Your bare skin is gonna get cut, scraped, frost-nipped, torn to pieces, even if you're generating tons of internal heat. You don't freeze to death, but your hands get so raw you can't hold a spear, your legs get so cut up you can't run, and then you die anyway. So the first pieces of clothing weren't full parkas. They were little, tiny, targeted pieces of protection. We're talking simple hide wraps for the hands, basic foot wrappings made from multiple layers of grass and hide, little scraps of fur tied around the wrists and ankles. That's it. That's all they needed. Scientists did a study a few years back with a group of winter survival experts who all had their metabolisms tested to be above average for cold tolerance, and they dropped them in 15-degree weather, butt naked, and they armed a pair of simple hide mitts, except for a pair of simple hide mitts and a pair of wrapped hide boots. Do you know how long they could stay out there, working, chopping wood, dragging supplies, without getting hypothermia? Over 3 hours. 3 hours. That's more than enough time to go out, hunt a deer, gather firewood, and get back to the warm hut. No full fur coat required. Everyone's been looking at this backwards this whole time. We thought clothing was invented first, so humans could go live in cold places. But no, humans first figured out how to make warm huts, evolved that high heat metabolism, then started making tiny little protective pieces for their hands and feet. And that's what let them survive the Ice Age for hundreds of thousands of years, long before anyone ever thought to sew a full shirt or pants weight. But there's even more wild stuff here. Let's talk about fire, because everyone goes, oh duh, they had fire. That's the obvious answer. But controlling fire isn't as easy as it sounds. If you're a group of 20 people living on a frozen tundra, where every piece of wood is buried under 3 feet of snow, how do you keep a fire going 24/7? How do you start a new one if your fire goes out in a blizzard? Most people can't start a fire with 2 sticks in 60-degree weather, let alone in a blizzard where everything is soaking wet. But our ancestors had another hack that no one talks about. They used mammoth dung as fuel. Mammoth dung is so full of dry grass and fibrous plant material that it burns slow, hot, and even when it's a little frozen, you can dry it out next to a small fire, and it will burn for hours. No smoke, no smoke. Perfect for keeping a low, steady heat going inside their huts. And they didn't just use it for fuel. They would mix it with moss and pack it into little clay balls, which they called fire eggs. You could keep one of these things glowing, smoldering, for 12 hours straight, no extra fuel needed. If you had to move camp, you just tuck one of these fire eggs into a little pouch around your neck, and you've got a portable, always lit heat source that you can use to start a new fire wherever you go. That's literally prehistoric portable lighter tech, 200,000 years ago. 200,000 years ago. How insane is that? And let's talk about food, because that's the secret fuel for that super hot metabolism we talked about earlier. Everyone thinks Ice Age humans were just eating mammoth steak all day, right? But no, their diet was way more optimized for heat production than anything we eat today. They weren't eating tons of simple carbs, no bread, no sugar, no processed garbage. Their diet was 70% high-fat animal protein, 20% starchy root vegetables that they dug up from under the snow, and 10% nuts and berries they stored for the winter. A diet that calorie-dense, that high in fat, means your body is basically running on jet fuel. You can eat one big meal of fatty mammoth meat, and that's enough calories to keep your internal heater cranked up for 12 full hours. No problem. Modern humans? We eat a bunch of carbs, we crash 2 hours later, our metabolism drops, and we're shivering by 8 p.m. Our ancestors never had that problem. They were running on a constant high-octane fuel source that kept their internal heat cranked all day long. Wait a second, but what about the Neanderthals? Because Neanderthals lived through some of the coldest parts of the Ice Age, way colder than anything modern humans ever faced, and they didn't have sewing needles at all. How did they do it? Recent studies of Neanderthal skeletons show that their entire body shape was perfectly optimized for heat retention. They were short, stocky, broad-chested. Their limbs were shorter than modern humans by almost 10%. That's the exact same body shape you see in people who live in the Arctic today, like the Inuit, who have way less surface area relative to their body mass, so they lose way less heat through their skin. A 5'4" Neanderthal male had the same body mass as a 6-foot modern human, but 15% less skin surface area to lose heat from. That's a massive advantage. On top of that, their noses were huge, wide flared, which warmed up the freezing cold Ice Age air before it got into their lungs. So they didn't get their respiratory system frozen every time they took a breath outside. That's not a random accident. That's evolution perfectly tuning their entire body to live in a world that was basically a permanent deep freeze. No fancy clothing required. But here's the plot twist that no one saw coming. When modern Homo sapiens first left Africa, around 70,000 years ago, we didn't have any of these adaptations. We were tall, lanky, long-limbed, evolved for the hot African savanna. We had that low modern human metabolism, almost no brown fat. We should have died the second we stepped foot into Ice Age Europe. But we didn't. Instead, we stole all the Neanderthals' best hacks. We learned how to build those mammoth bone-insulated huts. We learned how to make those fire eggs. We started eating that super high-fat diet, and, over just 10,000 years, our bodies started adapting too. We even interbred with Neanderthals, and a lot of us still carry those Neanderthal genes for higher brown fat production today. If you're the kind of person who's always hot, who walks around in a t-shirt when everyone else is wearing a winter coat, there's a 90% chance you've got that old Neanderthal brown fat gene still active in your DNA. That's a little piece of Ice Age survival superpower, still living inside you, right now. Wait. But hold on. Let's bust another myth. You've seen all those movies, right? 100 cavemen huddled around a single fire in a cave, all grunting at each other, fighting over a piece of meat. That's not what their social structure was like at all. One of the biggest, most underrated Ice Age survival hacks was group body heat sharing. If you've got 25 people all sleeping in the same insulated hut, all curled up together on a big shared bed, made of layers of moss, grass, and dried hay, the collective body heat from 25 metabolisms, running 30% hotter than modern humans. That's enough to heat the entire hut without even a fire. Archaeologists who did that full-scale hut reconstruction I mentioned earlier. They had 15 people spend the night in there, no fire at all, and the inside temperature stayed at 62 degrees the entire night. No heat source, just body heat. That's insane. Modern humans, 15 of us in a small room, we'd be lucky to get it up to 55 degrees. But our ancestors were so tuned into this that they didn't even need to keep the fire going all night. They'd let it die down before they went to sleep, and the collective body heat from the whole group kept everyone warm until sunrise. No one was freezing, no one had to wear 5 layers of clothing. It was all just optimized group living. And you know what's even funnier? A lot of the primitive tricks they used are actually way more effective than the stuff we buy today. Those simple grass and hide boots they wore. Modern survival experts tested them against a $300 top-of-the-line winter hiking boot. In 20-degree weather, walking through snow for 4 hours. The modern boot started to let the cold seep in after 2 hours. The toes went numb. The ancient grass hide wrap? The feet stayed perfectly warm the entire time. Because the multiple layers of trapped air between the grass fibers are a way better insulator than the synthetic materials we use today. People spend hundreds of dollars on fancy winter gear, and our ancestors were making better winter footwear out of stuff they found lying on the ground. No tools required. That's such a flex. Wait a second. But why did we ever invent full clothing then? If all this stuff worked so well, why did we go from just hand wraps and foot wraps to full-sewn parkas, pants, shirts, everything? The answer isn't about the cold getting colder. It's about the world changing. Around 40,000 years ago, the Ice Age got way more unstable. You had these massive sudden climate shifts, where the temperature could drop 20 degrees in a single week. Overnight, blizzards that would dump 10 feet of snow in 24 hours. Weather so extreme that even those perfectly insulated huts couldn't keep up. And on top of that, humans started traveling way longer distances. We started going on multi-day hunting trips. We started migrating hundreds of miles across the tundra, away from our warm huts for days at a time. You can't just rely on your internal heater and a pair of mitts when you're out in a blizzard for 3 days, no hut in sight. That's when the sewing needle was invented. Suddenly, you could sew hides together into perfectly tailored, form-fitting parkas, with no gaps, no wind getting through, that you could wear outside for hours, even in the worst weather. But here's the thing. For 150,000 years before that, humans were surviving just fine. No full clothing required. We only invented it when we needed to go further, stay out longer, explore more of the world. It wasn't a requirement for surviving the Ice Age. It was an upgrade that let us conquer the entire planet. And that's the part that no one ever puts in the textbooks. We don't tell kids that our naked big-brained ancestors out-survived every single giant furry mammal on the planet, not because we were stronger, not because we had sharp claws, not because we had natural fur coats, but because we hacked the system. We used our brains to turn the biggest flaw in our biology, being almost completely naked, no natural insulation, into a superpower. We didn't evolve fur. We evolved better ways to trap heat, better ways to generate heat, better ways to work together to keep each other warm. That's way more impressive than just growing a thick coat of fur like every other animal. Wait. But there's one last, super weird, almost unbelievable detail that scientists only published last year that blew my mind when I read it. Ice Age humans were intentionally fermenting meat and storing it underground in frozen permafrost pits to make it last all winter. Fermented meat is way easier to digest, it gives you way more accessible calories, and it's packed with extra nutrients that make your metabolism run even hotter. They weren't just eating raw mammoth meat. They had prehistoric energy drinks, basically, that cranked their internal heat production up even higher. And these frozen meat storage pits? They worked like natural refrigerators, so the meat never went bad. It stayed perfectly preserved for months, even years. So they never ran out of that high-octane fuel, even in the middle of the harshest winter, when there were no animals out to hunt. They had a backup food supply that kept their internal heaters running non-stop. No wonder they never froze. They had an endless supply of high-calorie, heat-boosting food, stored right outside their hut. Let's put this all together, so you can see how insane this whole system was. 200,000 years ago, a group of 25 Neanderthals, or early modern humans, wake up in their mammoth bone hut. It's 15 degrees outside, snow is blowing sideways, the glaciers are 100 miles north of their camp. They're almost completely naked, except for simple hide mitts and grass-wrapped boots. They eat a big breakfast of fermented mammoth fat and roasted root vegetables, which cranks their metabolisms up to full heat mode. A few of them grab their fire eggs, tuck them around their necks, head outside to go hunt a reindeer. They're out there for 3 hours, crawling through snow, chasing the herd, taking down a 300-pound reindeer, dragging it back to camp. Their skin is exposed to the freezing air, but their internal heater is running so hot, they're barely even cold. They're sweating a little under the hide mitts. They get back to the hut, where the rest of the group has been tending the small dung fire, keeping the inside at 70 degrees. They process the reindeer, store half the meat in the permafrost pit for later, use the hide to make new mitts and boot wraps. At the end of the day, everyone curls up together on the shared moss bed. Their collective body heat keeps the hut warm all night. No one freezes. No one gets hurt. That's a perfectly functioning Ice Age survival system. No sewing, no full clothing, no fancy tech, nothing but brains, biology, and teamwork. And we've been lying to kids about this for decades, acting like they were just dumb cavemen who got lucky and wrapped a fur around themselves. That's such an insult. These people were geniuses. They figured out a way to beat an entire planet-sized ice age, with nothing but sharp rocks, mammoth bones, and their big brains. They didn't just survive, they thrived. They lived through 100,000 years of the worst weather this planet has ever seen, and they passed that knowledge down from generation to generation. For hundreds of thousands of years. You know what's the funniest part? Today, we spend thousands of dollars on smart thermostats, heated jackets, 800 fill power-down parkas, fancy winter boots, and half the time we're still complaining that we're too cold. Our ancestors were walking around almost naked in weather that would make us run back to our cars screaming, and they were fine. They were out there getting stuff done, hunting, building, exploring, no complaints. It makes you wonder, right? How much of our "I'm always cold" problem today is just because we've lost that old hack, that ancient ability our bodies used to have to crank up the heat from the inside. If we ate that high-fat diet, if we spent more time close to other people, if we stopped relying so much on external heat, could we even get a little bit of that superpower back? I'm not saying you should go throw all your winter coats away and go run outside naked in the snow tomorrow. Don't do that. You'll get hypothermia, and the cops will show up at your house. And that's a whole different kind of viral video you don't want to be part of. But it is wild to think that the biggest, most epic survival win in the history of our species wasn't won with swords, or guns, or fancy technology. It was won by a bunch of mostly naked apes who figured out how to turn their own bodies into space heaters, build little insulated houses out of mammoth bones, and keep each other warm by sticking together. That's way cooler than any textbook story about fur coats' weight. And before you go, let me hit you with one last little fun fact that will break your brain. Scientists did genetic studies on clothing lice a few years back, right? Because clothing lice can only live in clothing. They can't live on your body hair. So by tracking when clothing lice evolved from head lice, you can figure out exactly when humans first started wearing regular clothing on a massive scale. You know what the date was? 170,000 years ago. But wait, that doesn't line up with the sewing needle timeline, right? 170,000 years ago, we didn't have sewing needles. So what were those lice living in? Not full sewn parkas. Those tiny little hand wraps, foot wraps, little scraps of fur, tied around wrists and ankles. That's it. That's all the clothing that existed for 120,000 years. And the lice evolved to live in those tiny little scraps of fabric, because that's all humans were wearing. That's the smoking gun proof that our whole "they wore full fur coats" story was wrong this entire time. The louse DNA doesn't lie. So next time you're shivering in your 3 layers of winter clothes, complaining that it's too cold outside, just remember, 200,000 years ago, your great, add like 10,000 more greats. ancestor was out there in weather 20 degrees colder, almost naked, dragging a mammoth back to camp, and they didn't even have a coffee to warm up afterwards. We come from way tougher stock than we give ourselves credit for. And the craziest part? A little piece of that Ice Age superpower is still inside every single one of us, hidden in our DNA. If you thought this was the kind of weird, counterintuitive prehistory fact that no one ever tells you, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more deep dives that break all the stuff you learned in 5th grade. Drop a comment down below and tell me if you're one of those people who's always hot, the one who wears a t-shirt in 50-degree weather, because I bet you've got that Neanderthal brown fat gene. And if you want me to do a follow-up video about how those Ice Age humans invented the first ever frozen food storage system that worked better than our modern freezers in some ways, let me know, and I'll make that next. Catch you guys in the next one.